Well, welcome into Bayou Roar. On this episode, we are going to take a look at LSU's upcoming matchup against Louisiana Tech on Saturday night in Death Valley. But first, we are going to talk a little bit of some baseball news. So, Jay Johnson, by the time this episode comes out, should have himself a brand new contract for the LSU Tigers. Where now, according to reports, he's going to be making a little over $3 million per season, which for a baseball coach in college is, I know, kind of outlandish. But look, when you think about the history of LSU baseball, and then you think about obviously the recent success they've had under Jay Johnson, where you've won two out of the last three national championships. I mean, obviously, that alone, I think, warrants this contract. And I know it's a high number, but look, that's what LSU wants to do because they love this baseball program. They are proud of this program, and for good reason. I mean, they've got the second most national championships of any other baseball program in the country, not just the SEC, in the nation. They've got the second most. And so they want to separate themselves from the pack. And obviously, having a great coach like Coach Johnson is a big part of that. And look, I'm excited about it because not only, has he proven that he can win the last couple years, but he's still putting the pieces together to continue to have success. Like he is killing it in the transfer portal for this upcoming season. He's continuing to land top-notch high school recruits to bolster this roster going into next year on top of all of the returning guys that he's going to have. Like this upcoming baseball season is going to be a ton of fun. I don't know if they're going to, go back to back or whatever, but this will still be a great team to watch, once the season starts up in February again. So, obviously looking forward to that because he's showing that he's not just going to rest on what he's already done. He's building this program to continue to have success more and more into the future. So, obviously, I am pumped about Coach Johnson and what he's doing here with LSU baseball. And glad we got Coach on a contract that's going to pay him well and also keep him here for a while. And hopefully, we land a couple more national championships here in the Coach Johnson era at LSU. But we will move on now because it is football season currently, and we've got a game on Saturday night in Death Valley against the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs. And look, this is a game that I know, when you look at it on paper, it's not exciting. It's just not. It's just not as exciting, especially comparing it to week one when you went on the road in a top 10 matchup against Clemson and you come out with a huge victory. You finally get the monkey off your back of you haven't won a season opener in 5 years. Brian Kelly had the whole thing of BK can't win the big games, like for some reason over him. And now you prove all of those doubters wrong in week one by doing what you did. And now you come back home, and that's awesome. And you're playing now a Louisiana Tech team that, by all means, I mean, just at the two rosters alone, you should squash them. But this is also a game where you can't afford to, slip up. I know last year Notre Dame, had the loss to Northern Illinois, and obviously, like, with that being their only loss, it didn't end up costing them in the end a chance to get into the playoff and compete for the championship and all that. But I'm just one of those people that, in my mind, you gotta go out there and just win the games you're supposed to win, especially coming into this one as a 37.5 point favorite. LSU just needs to go in and win. Don't give the committee or anybody any shadow of a doubt that, you may not deserve a spot in the playoff. Because here's the thing, if you had lost to Clemson, you probably could have survived that. If you lose to another team on your schedule in the SEC, let's say a South Carolina, or if Alabama improves at some point, losing on the road in Tuscaloosa, sometimes you can survive some of those losses. What Notre Dame was able to survive last year was probably the biggest test because I think all year long the discussion was just that. Like, well, they lost to Northern Illinois. Should we really let them in, or whatever? And it's like, that was a question that hung over them. So you need to go into this game and you need to beat Louisiana Tech. And in my mind, you need to do it definitively. Like, just don't leave any shadow of a doubt that you don't deserve to be considered one of the top teams in the country. So there are things on both sides of the ball that I believe if LSU does, they should be able to win this game handily, not have any problems at all. And you can go ahead and start looking forward to the game next week against Florida when they come to Baton Rouge. So we're going to start offensively and talk about some of the things on offense that I would like for them to do against Louisiana Tech. And the first thing being continuing that offensive dominance that you saw in week one, carry over into week two. I know by the final score of 17-10, you wouldn't really think of that being an offensive like masterclass for Joe Sloan and the Tigers, but it really was because, with Tom Allen and all of the changes Clemson made defensively, I mean, that was a good defense. It really was. I mean, that was a solid defense, and you were able to really make them work a lot throughout the night. You were showing them all kinds of different looks. I mean, and really in the second half is when you saw LSU really start to heat up. Nussmeier was really starting to go out there and start to see the field and find the guys that he needed to find. You were able to take advantage of just defensive mismatches that they showed you. I mean, Joe Sloan ran the same Jawan Johnson play like 5 times in a row before they finally started to cover it up. I mean, just little things like that that just showed like LSU is in their bag right now. Like they are absolutely going out there and flexing their offensive muscles in the second half. And look, you had more points out there that just ended up not working out. Obviously, the biggest one being the Berrien Brown touchdown being taken off the board. If you had scored that touchdown, I mean, that would have been 3 touchdowns that you scored in the second half while Clemson's putting up a big old goose egg the entire second half. I mean, that would have just continued to widen the gap over the night for LSU. But of course, as we all know, that touchdown got taken off the board. So you end up still with an impressive second half where you outscored them, you outplayed them. But I want to see that continue over into Louisiana Tech now. Continue to ride that wave of energy that you've built up and just continue to go out there and execute that offense at the highest level possible. That's what I want to see on Saturday night against Louisiana Tech. And along with that, I want to continue to see the running game develop more and more and more. You outrushed Clemson in your game last time. I know it wasn't the prettiest run game in the world, but you did outrush them. And I know Clemson didn't have a true running back and all these things, but I mean, the truth is, I mean, at the end of the day, you were getting almost 4 yards a carry while they were held under 2 yards a carry. And that was really, really impressive that you were able to outrush them when they have a mobile quarterback that's a part of their running game, too. So, really good night for LSU running the football last week, even though, again, it wasn't always pretty at times. But can you continue to develop that this week? Can you continue to set the tone this week? Help those offensive linemen continue to grow in their run blocking, continue to help these running backs develop a little bit of a rhythm and a groove, especially the guys that are not named Caden Durham, because we know he's going to be the guy, right, for the rest of the season carrying the ball. But can you get Caleb Jackson? Can you get Harlem Berry? And if Jawan Johnson's going to be playing running back this year, can you get Jawan Johnson the much needed carries that they all need so that they can all continue to improve and be a consistent part of this offense moving forward? Because as good as Caden Durham is, you can't just leave him alone in the backfield as your primary rusher. That's just something you can't do. So, can you continue to develop that along? Can Alex Atkins continue to find new ideas to put into the run game that Joe Sloan can take advantage of? I really liked the Xavion Thomas wrinkle last week where he would kind of motion into the backfield. They'd hand it off to him. And I mean, he got Clemson a couple times on that play. He had some big runs in that game. So can you continue to do that to help this offense to just continue to grow and to be even more dominant? Because we know the passing game is going to be there. We know Garrett Nussmeier and all these weapons. That's going to be the strength of your offense for sure. But man, like we've talked about for a long time now, if you can get that running game going and make it consistent each and every single game, that's going to help so much, especially with this offensive line that may still need some time to kind of gel and lock in and all these things. If you can continue to improve in that area. That's going to help you in these big games that are coming up, like next week against Florida. So continue to build on that run game, continue to help make that a strong point of your offense. I want to see that on Saturday night against Louisiana Tech. And I also want to see an element added back into the offense that they weren't really able to use against Clemson, and that is the deep passing game. So, because of the style of defense Clemson played, where obviously they were leaning heavily on that pass rush with their awesome defensive line, where they were trying to, basically catch LSU napping. I think they were expecting LSU to try to use the strength of the team, which is their receivers that can run super fast off the line. Chris Hilton, Berrien Brown, Nick Anderson at 6'4", but can also run like a 4.5 40. Like, they were expecting LSU, I think, to try to take advantage of that and try to take the deep shots because, I mean, that is what LSU did, especially a lot towards the end of last year once they got Chris Hilton back. Oklahoma and Baylor, Chris Hilton had several big time touchdowns that came on the long bombs. And I think Clemson was hoping LSU was going to try to dig into that well. But what Joe Sloan did very smartly was he said, no, I've basically got a brand new offensive line and I need to try to take the pressure off them as much as possible. So everything was quick. Everything was fast. There was no real, plays involved at all throughout the night that would have been really considered a deep shot. I think probably the longest pass that they threw all night was the Berrien Brown play. I think that was probably the longest pass play I saw dialed up all night. But other than that, I mean, Nuss was really good about just making sure you took every quick throw you could because that was going to take the pressure off of this offensive line, and that's what was going to help you not fall into Clemson's trap, which was they wanted you to try to take time to develop out a play so that they could take advantage of your new offensive line with their veteran defensive line. But here's the thing. Louisiana Tech, that's not going to be the case this week. Louisiana Tech is not rolling out a defensive line like you saw against Clemson. So you're going to have an opportunity to let some of those plays actually breathe and develop. And so, again, basically, when you have a roster that can out athlete the roster on the other side of the ball, you should be able to take advantage of Nick Anderson, Chris Hilton, and Berrien Brown's speed and hopefully hit some guys over the top for some really long touchdown passes. And I think that's important because Nuss does need to develop that timing and that rhythm with all of them because we've seen before in big games where that's not present and they have the opportunities to do that. LSU got really close sometimes to losing those ball games because, they missed time to throw to Chris Hilton or they missed time to throw to this guy or that guy or whoever it was. But now that you've got so much speed on that side of the ball, and again, with bigger matchups coming on the horizon where maybe they get aggressive and you need to be able to take a deep shot every now and again to take some of the pressure, off of the offense, this is a great game to start working on some of those plays. So I really do hope they can start to add some more of those wrinkles into the offense this week against Tech. So by next week against Florida, we can say, okay, they got some plays in that they feel good about. Maybe we'll see some of those against a Florida Gator defense that should be pretty solid next week. But against La Tech, you need to start developing your deep pass game because that was not really something you did a whole lot against Clemson. But hopefully that will develop this week. And the last thing I have for the offense is really, I just don't want to see Tyree Adams out there this week. I want him to rest and get healthy because the next game against Florida is much more important than this one. I know in games like this, you're trying to clean up some things, you're trying to develop some chemistry, but look, Tyree Adams got rolled up on last week against Clemson, and while he was fine, he returned to the game. After the game, he was wearing a boot. People were saying he was saying, "Oh, it's nothing, it's just precautionary, all this stuff." But in my mind, man, if you're even wearing a boot at all, even if it's not that serious of an injury, and nobody's really talked about it this week, so maybe it's not that serious of an injury, but I would rather my big time left tackle, the guy that I need to be, the key piece of that offensive line, I want him to be 100% healthy going into Florida. let Carius Curran, let some of these other guys that are needing to get some reps, needing to get some playing time, let them go out there and get some reps and develop some chemistry just in case you need them. I mean, what if an injury like that happens again, later down the road? Do you really want to try to do the DJ Chester experiment again? I talked about it, when we recapped the Clemson game. I didn't love that because he got blown up. Chester got blown up against Clemson on a couple of those plays. It did not go well. And so, can you develop a guy that you actually think could be a really good tackle for you at some point, like a Carius Kern? Can you get him reps now so that later down the road you feel a little bit more comfortable about throwing him in? That's what I want to see against La Tech on Saturday. Can you get some of those guys involved and just rest Tyree Adams until next week? Because that's the much more important game for him to play in. So we need to see less Tyree Adams and more of some of these younger guys on the O line that they're rotating in. But offensively, man, if you can do those things, you should be able to put up some points in a hurry and hopefully get Ness and the boys out before the fourth quarter and let them go ahead and start to rest and prepare for Florida next week. But I also think a part of this is also defense. And defensively, what can you do to make sure that the game doesn't get close? Because that's going to be the key thing. Can the defense keep La Tech off the board and keep them from making this a game? And look, I mean, I think the second half of Clemson proved that, I mean, this LSU defense can pitch a shutout if they needed to. I mean, they are absolutely capable of holding you to 0 points. But obviously, at the same time, in this new era of college football, like any team can put up points at almost any point in time. So I'm expecting like Louisiana Tech to probably score at least once or twice, especially if we get like backups in later in the game, of course. But while your starters are in, can they pitch another shutout to allow you to build a little bit of a lead to, again, where you can get some of these guys out and start to rest them a little bit? And look, Louisiana Tech's offense is not super explosive by any means. I mean, their quarterback last week threw for like 160 yards, and I think their leading receiver was like 59. Running back had like 60 yards. So nothing too crazy. I don't think you're facing an offense that's considered elite, but their quarterback is what I would like to call mobile-ish. Like, he's not the fastest runner. Obviously, he's not a Jalen Milroe. He's not a Lenora Sellers. He's not a Marcel Reed. He's not like some of these quarterbacks that you have faced in the past or what you're going to face later this year. But he is, mobile enough where it's going to continue to stress on your defense to, again, play very sound fundamental football. And can that defense stand up and keep him from using his legs? Because I don't think with this secondary, if they played the way they did last week, there's no way Louisiana Tech's going to have a chance to really throw around the yard in my mind. But I mean, the key part of that is, can you contain the quarterback? Because if you're locking them down, I mean, he's just going to try to tuck it and run as much as he can. So, if you can shut that down and continue to play disciplined against that mobile quarterback, that's going to be really good for you. And that's really the only thing about this Louisiana Tech team at this moment in time that I can really think of as being a wrinkle that they could use in their favor is a mobile quarterback. But again, LSU did so well against Cade Klubnik last week. I mean, I can't really expect this guy to really go out there and be much of a threat, I guess. Again, unless you just throw out all of the, second or third stringers. But I mean, even then, I would still expect for this defense in year 2 under Blake Baker with all the talent they have to probably not be as vulnerable as they've been, even when they've played some smaller schools in the last couple years that have made games a lot tighter than you would like. So, but for this defense, can you continue to play dominant ball and, again, put it into a situation where your offense can build a lead and you don't have to worry about anything the rest of the game? That's really all I need to see from the defense is, can you continue to show up, not just against the big time team like Clemson, but even against these teams that you should definitely be able to beat, like Louisiana Tech? That's going to be a huge test for this defense in my mind is, can you just continue to play that way even in games where you're not, just all hyped up, and ready to go because it's a big time top 10 matchup. So That's gonna be big, and really, that plays into my overall thoughts for both sides of the ball is, can you not allow that, like, post big game sleepiness to really take effect? And what's been nice is that in Brian Kelly's press conferences this week, he's talked about that. He's talked about how they reminded these guys, like, "Hey, we've played teams like Nichols last year that really gave us a whole lot of problems, and we should not have had a whole lot of problems against them. But we allowed them to hang around and to make that a much tighter ball game than we should have." And I think that's a good message to have going into this one because yes, like a team like Nichols should not have been able to hang around with LSU last year, but they did, and it was really concerning. And it really showed that even though like the defense had taken steps forward and the defense had improved in a lot of ways, there was still a long ways to go. And and even offensively, there was some times where they just didn't look complete. And so, can you go into this one and just keep that mentality of we just got to go in there and win? And on both sides of the ball, play with that urgency of, hey, let's get in, let's win, let's move on to the next one. That's got to be your mentality heading into this one on both sides of the ball. Don't play around, just do what you're supposed to do and come away with the win. If they can do that, they'll obviously have a lot of success, but they also got to play clean on both sides of the ball and not shoot themselves in the foot. They cannot commit a ton of turnovers. They cannot, you know, commit a lot of penalties in my mind. Like those are the types of things that are going to kill this team's momentum. Like that's going to be what absolutely stops it dead in its tracks. If LSU goes out there and Garrett Nussmeier plays around too much trying to hit a bunch of deep bombs to Berrien Brown or Chris Hilton that aren't really there, but he's forcing them, well, then you may end up with a couple picks that could end up hurting you if you're not on top of your game. And same for the defense. I mean, if you go out there and you're overexcited and you commit a bunch of penalties and you give them a chance to really kind of hang around, this ball game could end up being a lot tighter than you want it to be. So self-inflicted wounds could be the thing that absolutely again destroy everything that you've tried to build up to this point. So can you keep that from happening this week? And can you keep your head on your shoulders and say, okay, we're going to knock off all these things and we are not going to do the things that are going to hurt us that we can control. There's a lot of things you can't control in football, but these are things we can control and these are things we can do to stop ourselves from tripping ourselves up. So, do that this weekend. You should end up walking away again with a really nice win. And look, they are a 37.5 point favorite, and I really hope that comes true. Because I think the biggest thing for this game is, can you walk away with no injuries? Can you walk away being able to rest some of your starters? Again, not just for next week against Florida, but for the fact that, like, I mean, you're going to need these guys to be as healthy as possible when the schedule gets tougher, the further and further in you get. So, can you get some key rest in now so that you're not struggling by the time you get to the late season and you're having to go on the road to Alabama, on the road to Oklahoma, playing a tough, Texas A&M team at home? Like, can you get your guys the rest they need now so they're not in a bad situation later in the year? So that's what I want to see. And look, because LSU's a 37.5 point favorite, I'm not really going to throw out a score prediction. I think that would just be silly. But I do believe LSU obviously will win this game. And I do expect them to win it big. I mean, I do expect them to win big. I think the mentality of this team is in the right place. I think the coaching staff is going to have them playing, on the level that they should, not taking a rest, not taking a break because they're playing Louisiana Tech, but giving them an opportunity now in this one to truly go out there, play hard, but also get some guys in, for reps and things like that, and resting the guys that you need to rest. I think they're going to be able to accomplish all of those things on Saturday night. Again, I know this is not the most fun game to talk about because there's really no matchups that you can look at, unlike last week where you're breaking down every angle between Nuss and Klubnik or the receivers versus the defensive backs on both sides of the ball. There's not really anything like that to talk about, but this is still an important game because you want to win it and you want to win it impressively so you can continue to show people that you're one of the top teams in college football. So, again, expect the Tigers to get a big win on Saturday night, but there's some other games in week 2 that I am looking at and honestly kind of looking forward to. So, we're going to talk about, who I think is going to win some of the bigger week 2 matchups. So when you look at the week 2 matchups, obviously they're not as big or nearly as attractive as what we had in week 1. I mean, where you had Texas, Ohio State, LSU, Clemson, like all of these big games throughout the weekend. You don't really have as many of those to look forward to this week, but there are still some interesting matchups that I want to take a look at that I do think are going to be fun to watch and probably the best matchups of the week, all things considered, because we do have a lot of smaller games that are going to be on the docket for this week. But the first one I want to talk about is Ole Miss going on the road to Kentucky. Now, when you look at this on the surface, you would think, okay, well, this is an easy Ole Miss win, but that was not the case last year. I mean, last year Ole Miss struggled really, really mightily against Kentucky, and that was a much better Ole Miss team than the one that I think they have this year. And so, Ole Miss right now is an 8.5 point favorite in that game. And I could really see this going one of two ways. I think Kentucky either shocks people being in Lexington, maybe Mark Stoops' defense steps up in a way and slows down Ole Miss somehow, or just, I mean, Zach Calzada just comes out of nowhere and has the game of his life or something like that. Either Kentucky just ends up playing this one super close, or Ole Miss just, I mean, absolutely pours it on them and they absolutely end up blowing them out. I mean, I can see both realities, of that in this game. I really can. I can see both of those things coming true. And so for me, it really comes down to, you know, what I truly believe. And what I truly believe is that even though I'm not as high on this Ole Miss team this year as like the one they had last year, I do think this Ole Miss team is still better than this Kentucky squad. I think this Kentucky squad is just still not very good. And, man, it's just a tough program to really get behind this year. Even being at Lexington, the fact that they really struggled with Toledo last week, I don't think bodes well for them. So I have Ole Miss winning this one. But again, Ole Miss is an 8.5 point favorite in this one, but it really can be either way. But I have Ole Miss winning no matter what. Even if it is a tighter ball game, I think just Lane is the better coach, and I think that at the end of the day, Ole Miss is just the better team. So Ole Miss pulls out the win in this one, but I've also got Oklahoma State and Oregon as one that I'm keeping an eye on, and mostly just because I think the spread is kind of, really crazy for this one because Oregon's a 27.5 point favorite. And I know that Oklahoma State is not like super talented, this year as they've been in the past. But man, Mike Gundy just, has this ability to like make games super interesting, even the ones that they really shouldn't be competitive in. And so for me, I'm wondering if Gundy will get some of that magic like rolling up in this game and somehow be able to be on par or compete even a little bit with Oregon. Now, definitely I think Oregon will come out the winner here. I've got Oregon winning this game, but again, for Oklahoma State, can you muster up just a little bit of some magic here for us? And look, I mean, I'm looking at some of their team leader stats from week 1 right now, and it's not the prettiest numbers you've ever seen in your life, especially when like Dante Moore for Oregon last week threw for 213 and 3 touchdowns. Like, by all means, like Oregon is the much more talented team and should win. But again, it just seems like Gundy's got like that for LSU fans, at least you'll remember. I mean, just like a Les Miles type of thing where he just can seem to like be able to just pull something crazy out of the hat sometimes and like, I don't know, be able to compete in games he shouldn't. So, I'm not saying Oklahoma State's going to pull off the upset, but they could end up making this more of a ball game at some point than you think. And so that's just the thing about it. The spread's kind of crazy on that one, but I still do have Oregon taking the win in week 2 over Oklahoma State. And then we get to USF versus Florida. And this is at Florida, so this is in Gainesville at the Swamp. Florida is a 17.5 point favorite. going into this one. So definitely, people are siding with Florida and for good reason. I mean, Florida returns DJ Lagway, who's a really good quarterback. You've got just a really good defense with a great defensive line for Florida as well. Like, by all means, Florida definitely has the tools to be the big time winner in this one. But here's the thing. USF is also not a team just to scoff at by any means. I mean, USF, the last couple times they've played Bama, those have been really tight ball games. I mean, those have been crazy ball games to try to keep up with. They had Bama, I know Bama pulled away in the game last year, but I mean, they had Bama on the ropes for a while until the end of that game. But I mean, it was just a crazy ball game from start to finish. And the year before was even crazier and tighter than the one that was in Tuscaloosa. So USF is a team that, man, they can just hang around and make things very, very interesting. And so USF, is not a team that I think should be disrespected this much in this game as a 17.5 point underdog. And so while I'm still picking Florida to win the game, I think Florida will win. I think if you're a bettor, especially, this could be one of those, spreads where you can say, hey, Florida may win, but I don't know if they're winning by 17.5. Like, I would put some money on it not being that wide of a spread because, again, South Florida just has this ability in these types of games to make them a lot tighter and a lot more competitive than what you would expect. Because I've seen that the last couple of years. Even their first game against Boise State started off tight, and then USF ended up just kind of completely running away with it. But this one's one to keep your eye on. I definitely think this is one that's not going to go the way I think a lot of people expect. But again, I do pick Florida to pull out the win at home, which would set them up obviously for a big time matchup in Baton Rouge next week. But so far we got Ole Miss, Oregon, and Florida playing, which leads us into two of the games that are also going to be going on at 6:30 while LSU plays. The first one being Arizona State and Mississippi State. Now, Arizona State is a 6.5 point favorite, which I do think is fair, but here's the interesting thing. Last year, when this game was played at Arizona State, Mississippi State only lost by a touchdown. And that was a Arizona State team that ended up going to the college football playoff and ended up being a pretty solid team. While Mississippi State was a team that ended up going 2-10. So the fact that this is in Starkville, the fact that, you've got a Mississippi State team that played a lot better in week 1 last week, like, this could be an interesting game. Like, this is definitely one that could be a lot tighter than people are expecting. And look, with a 6.5 point spread, I think people are expecting this to be a pretty decent ball game. But at the same time, it's like, man, if Mississippi State can pull one out this early in the year against a top 15 team in Arizona State, that would be absolutely wild. And look, it's cooking up, right now to look like they could potentially do that. They did play a lot better against Southern Miss than I expected. And look, I know it's Southern Miss, but this was a team last year that lost to Toledo. So, the fact that they won and pulled away in the second half is pretty impressive, actually. But at the end of the day, as much as I would love for the Bulldogs to pull out the big upset, because one, I'm an agent of chaos and I love when chaotic things happen in college football, but also two, some really good friends of mine are Mississippi State fans. They do a Mississippi State podcast. I would love for them to have something awesome to talk about in the post game. Unfortunately, I just can't go with the Bulldogs. I'm picking Arizona State to win, but again, I think this will be a tight ball game. I do think this will come down to being a really tough game, and this will be a game that is maybe ends up being a lot closer than people expect. So I do have Arizona State winning, but very, very close. So I would pick AZ State in that one, which leads us to the big ball game of the day, the only matchup that really on paper is what I think a lot of people are looking forward to, and that's Michigan versus Oklahoma. So you got a Michigan team led by LSU's favorite quarterback in the country, Bryce Underwood, going up against John Mateer and the Oklahoma Sooners. And look, neither of these teams played anybody worth a lick of salt last week. But both quarterbacks ended up looking pretty good. Bryce Underwood played pretty well in his first game. John Mateer played really well for his first game in an Oklahoma uniform, at least. Like, this is a ball game going into it that definitely is probably not only the biggest ball game of the weekend, but probably one of the most interesting ball games of the weekend, because for Michigan, they've got something to prove, that with Bryce now, that they can really turn things around offensively, that they can pair that offense up with that defense, which has always been, really, really good the last couple of years. Like, there's some potential that, I mean, Michigan could go into this one and potentially pull it out. But for Oklahoma, this is also a big statement for them because, since joining the SEC, they've, had a rough time. Last year did not go great for them. They got a big win over Alabama, which was awesome, but they just, never seemed to be able to put it all together. Jackson Arnold ended up being a big failure for them. So they went out and got John Mateer, a guy that they believed in. And he's a guy that a lot of people have hyped up, that a lot of people have really, gotten behind as a potential Heisman winner. I mean, a lot of people are putting their money on him to win the Heisman this year. Like, there's a lot of things about this Oklahoma team that people like. And if you listen to my record prediction pod that I did first, our very first episode, I did say I don't really get the hype for this Oklahoma team. Like, John Mateer could end up being great. I don't know. It's just, coming from Washington State, you do always have to wonder, like, how is he going to adjust to the SEC, and things like that. And so this is going to be the game that kind of really helps, at least in my mind, to kind of figure out, okay, what is this Oklahoma team going to be moving forward this year? Is it going to be a team that could be a legitimate threat throughout the rest of the year? Or is this an Oklahoma team that maybe isn't really worth all the hype that they were getting in the preseason? I think this game is going to tell us a lot about both of these squads, but particularly Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is a 4.5 point favorite going into this one. And while, again, I would love for Michigan to roll up in there and to beat Oklahoma, I just don't really see it happening, only because for Bryce Underwood, this is a really tough ask for a, a freshman quarterback, a true freshman quarterback, going into his second career start, to have to go on the road to Norman to play a primetime game where all the lights are going to be shining on you. Now, this is what you signed up for, obviously, if you're Bryce Underwood. But also, like, I just think when you're going up against an Oklahoma squad with Brent Venables, who will be calling the defense, and he's a really, really good defensive mind. You've got a veteran quarterback on the other side, and John Mateer, that's going to be rolling out there. He's got experience, at least, more experience than Bryce Underwood has. I tend to side with the more experienced quarterback in this situation, just because it is at home for Oklahoma. And I think Mateer can get comfortable real fast and potentially put up enough points to help Oklahoma pull out the win. While I think Bryce Underwood may make one or two freshman mistakes along the way that could end up costing his team the opportunity to get the points they need to hang around in the game. So I do like Oklahoma in this matchup, and I do have them winning it. So just to quickly recap, I got Ole Miss beating Kentucky, Oregon beating Oklahoma State, Florida beating South Florida, Arizona State beating Mississippi State, and Oklahoma beating Michigan. And look, I did not do great on my picks last week. Like, that was an absolute disaster. I mean, Texas let me down. Alabama just did not show up at all in Tallahassee. Like, it was a rough week one for most of my predictions. I did get Miami right, so at least there was that. But I even picked the LSU game wrong. So who knows? We never know how things are going to play out until we see the games happen. But I hope that, some of these games will add a little bit of more excitement to week two than what we're expecting. So, but those are my predictions for the bigger week two games that we got going on for college football this weekend. But before we get out of here, there is one piece of college football news that I feel like I just want to touch on real quick before we conclude. And that's, I think the NCAA is moving towards a really good direction for the transfer portal. So they're on 3 reported earlier today that it looks like the NCAA Football Oversight Committee has now agreed and they have voted to support a singular transfer portal window. And from the reports that I have now seen following that announcement, it looks like that this would be in January. It would only be about 10 days, so no 30-day transfer portal. You'd have about 10 days to put your name in, get going, and then that's it. There's no spring portal. There's no other portal outside of this. And I would be absolutely ecstatic if this holds up and proves to be true. Because in my mind, that's one of the key things that they have to fix. The transfer portal needs to be fixed. Having these multiple windows is a disaster. There needs to just be one, and you need to be able to set up your roster then and then just roll with what you got. And in that way, you can have real spring games again. You can have real competition for the roster, knowing guys can't just leave in the spring portal because they're not happy about where they are. You can truly start to have a little bit of real college football kind of come back into the fold, knowing that you're not going to lose guys in the spring portal. So I would love for that to happen. I would also love for eventually there to be a transfer portal rule where they only get a one-time use for the transfer portal. Of course, outside of ex, just extremely difficult circumstances like their head coach leaving or something like that. But a one-time transfer portal use for everybody, I think that would help clean up things a lot. I also think we need to change recruiting with high school kids, saying, "Hey, once you commit, you are locked into that commitment." Something like that. We got to figure something out with that because the truth is high school recruiting is extremely messy. It's extremely messy right now to where commitments don't even really matter. It only matters about when that piece of paper is signed on National Signing Day, and sometimes not even that. So there is a lot of things that I think do need to be fixed in college football right now. And it's not necessarily the NIL component for me. That's just going to be a part of it from now on. But this is a huge step in the right direction, lowering the transfer portal windows to one and making it more concise, I think is going to be so great for everybody moving forward. So I really like this move. Again, I hope it holds up and I hope it's the truth moving forward because that's going to improve things a ton for college football. And there's still a long way to go, but that would be a huge step in the right direction, at least in my mind. So, but that's everything we got for today. Hey, if you would, please make sure to like, share, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. Also, we are on the YouTube, so you can leave us a like and a subscribe. That would be awesome. And hey, make sure to give us a follow at Bayou Roar Pod on Instagram. I'd love to interact with you guys. We're also on Twitter at Bayou Roar Pod. Would love to hear your thoughts, your predictions, all those good things on how you feel the La Tech game's going to go on Saturday night, what you would like to see happen, all those good things. Make sure to reach out. We'd love to interact with you. And hey, I hope you guys have an awesome weekend watching college football. I hope you make the most of it, even with some smaller matchups on the schedule. But hey, let's have a great weekend. Let's have a great Saturday night in Death Valley and go Tigers.